The foreclosure notice arrived on the same October morning that Sarah Chen's 12-year-old Corolla finally refused to start, its engine releasing a death rattle that perfectly matched her checking account balance. Zero hope of resurrection. At 35, working 2 jobs while raising her 10-year-old son Marcus alone, Sarah had become an expert at financial juggling, but even her carefully orchestrated system of minimum payments and payment extensions was collapsing under the weight of an unexpected medical bill from Marcus's emergency appendectomy 3 months earlier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. $28,000, she whispered, staring at the red-stamped final notice while standing in the parking lot of Hartley Property Management, where she worked 20 hours a week keeping books for the county's stingiest real estate company. The autumn rain pelted her broken umbrella as she calculated for the 100th time. Even with her night shifts at the 24-hour pharmacy and her weekend bookkeeping clients, she was drowning. The morning had started with such mundane promise. Sarah had woken at 5:30 a.m. as always, tiptoeing through their small apartment to avoid waking Marcus before his alarm. She'd made his lunch, peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, and the last juice box from the multi-pack she'd bought on sale 3 weeks ago. She'd even managed to scrape together enough change from the bottom of her purse to include $1 for the school vending machine, knowing how much it meant to him to buy something like the other kids occasionally did. But then the Corolla had wheezed its last breath in the apartment complex parking lot, and the carefully maintained illusion of managing had shattered. The mechanic she'd called had been brutally honest. "The engine's shot, Sarah. Even if I could fix it, we're talking $3,000 minimum. Honestly, it's not worth it. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million. She'd thanked him, ended the call, and stood in the rain doing the math that had become her constant companion. Rent was due in 5 days, $1,850 for their 2-bedroom apartment, already the cheapest she could find within the school district. Electric bill, 2 months behind at $340. Marcus's after-school program, $200 a month she couldn't skip because she worked until 6 p.m. at the property management office and until midnight at the pharmacy 3 nights a week. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus's school. Reminder, science camp deposit $400 due Friday for spring trip. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Another thing she'd have to tell her son they couldn't afford. Another disappointment in a year full of them. Marcus never complained, which somehow made it worse. He'd developed his father's quiet acceptance of hardship, a trait that broke her heart every time she saw it in his young face. She thought of Dan, of how different their lives were supposed to be. They'd had such plans. Dan's promotion at the engineering firm was going to let Sarah go back to school, finish her accounting degree. They were going to buy a house with a yard where Marcus could play. They were going to take vacations, save for college, have another child. But a drunk driver on Route 89 had ended all those plans 5 years ago, leaving Sarah with a folded flag, a life insurance policy that had barely covered the funeral and immediate expenses, and a 5-year-old son who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. "Sarah, get in here." Gerald Hartley's voice boomed from the office entrance, interrupting her spiral of despair. The 70-year-old property owner had the demeanor of someone who'd squeezed every penny from every transaction since the Nixon administration. "Got a special project for you." She hurried inside, shaking the rain from her broken umbrella. The property management office occupied a narrow storefront between a nail salon and a long-closed video rental store. The interior hadn't been updated since the 1980s. Wood paneling, orange carpet, and the perpetual smell of mildew mixed with the burnt coffee Hartley made every morning and reheated throughout the day. "You're late," Hartley grumbled, though. Sarah had actually arrived 10 minutes early as always. Car trouble. she explained simply, knowing better than to elaborate. Hartley had no patience for what he called sob stories, despite being the source of many of them through his questionable property management practices. "That's your problem, not mine." He thrust a manila folder at her, the papers inside slightly damp from the humidity. "The old Brenner cottage up on Ridgewood Mountain. Been in probate for 3 years, finally cleared. Bank wants a full inventory before they list it. Every stick of furniture, every doorknob, every damned candlestick. You know the drill." Sarah flipped through the folder, finding photocopied documents and blurry fax images of a Victorian cottage that looked like it had been frozen in time, then abandoned to the elements. Even through the poor quality copies, she could see the elaborate architecture, the kind of craftsmanship that no one bothered with anymore. "This looks like a week's worth of work at least," she said, already calculating the hours, the gas money. She'd need to borrow to get there, the additional childcare costs. 3 days, Hartley counted, settling his considerable bulk into his cracked leather desk chair. "That's all the bank authorized. But here's the thing, you do this right. Fast and thorough, and I'll throw in a bonus, $500 cash, $500. It wasn't much in the grand scheme of her debts, but it meant keeping the electricity on another month, maybe even putting something toward the overdue rent. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Just need someone detail-oriented who won't get spooked." Hartley's expression shifted to something almost resembling concern, which immediately put Sarah on alert. In 2 years of working for him, she'd never seen him show genuine emotion about anything except money. "The place has been empty since old man Brenner died in 21. Locals say, well, they say a lot of things. Just stick to the inventory." "What kind of things?" Sarah pressed, though she suspected she knew. Rural Vermont was full of abandoned properties with their accompanying ghost stories, local legends and whispered warnings. Nonsense mostly. Lights in the windows when no one's there. Strange sounds from the basement. You know how these mountain people are. 50 years of isolation and suddenly everyone's got a haunted house story. Hartley waved dismissively. Theodore Brenner was eccentric, sure. Whole family was. But the cottage is just a cottage. Get in, catalogue everything, get out. 3 days. "I'll need to arrange transportation," Sarah began, but Hartley was already turning to his computer. "Take the company truck, but you pay for gas, and I better not see a single new scratch on it." The company truck was a 1998 Ford Ranger with questionable brakes and a temperamental transmission, but it was better than walking. Sarah accepted the keys along with the folder, her mind already working through the logistics. She'd need to arrange for Marcus to stay late at after school, which meant additional fees. She'd have to call out from her pharmacy shift, losing that income. But $500 cash. When do I start? Tomorrow. Keys are in the folder. And Sarah? Hartley's watery blue eyes fixed on her with unusual intensity. The Brenner family was influential. Old money, old connections. There might be valuable items in that cottage, items that need to be properly documented for the estate. He paused meaningfully. "Everything goes on the inventory. Everything, understood?" Sarah understood perfectly. Hartley was hoping she'd find something valuable that he could potentially skim before the bank's assessment. It wouldn't be the first time he'd tried to work angles on estate properties, though usually he was more subtle about it. "Everything gets documented," she confirmed, having no intention of participating in whatever scheme he might be planning. She needed this job too badly to risk it on Hartley's questionable ethics. That evening, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table, helping Marcus with his algebra homework while researching the Brenner property on her laptop, a refurbished model. She'd bought 3 years ago that now required constant connection to its charger. The kitchen of their apartment was barely large enough for the table and 2 chairs, but she'd tried to make it cheerful, with Marcus's artwork taped to the refrigerator and a small herb garden growing in cups on the windowsill. X equals 12, Marcus announced, showing his work. "Let me check," Sarah said, reviewing his equations. "Perfect. You're getting really good at this. Mr. Rodriguez says I might be able to test into advanced math next year, Marcus said proudly. Then his expression fell. But it has an extra supply fee. We'll figure it out, Sarah promised, the familiar weight of inadequacy settling on her shoulders. Her son was brilliant. Everyone said so. He deserved every opportunity, every advantage, and she could barely keep the lights on. She turned her attention back to the laptop, searching for information about the Brenner cottage. What she found was surprisingly extensive. The cottage had been built in 1891 by Cornelius Brenner, a reclusive engineer who'd made a fortune in early hydroelectric projects. The Brenner name appeared in numerous historical documents related to Vermont's industrial development. Cornelius had designed dams, power stations, and infrastructure projects throughout New England. Mum, you're doing that thing again, Marcus observed, looking up from his next problem. What thing? Biting your lip while you think. You only do that when you're worried. Sarah forced a smile, constantly amazed by her son's perceptiveness. He'd been forced to grow up too fast, becoming attuned to her moods and stress levels in ways that no 10-year-old should have to be. Just planning tomorrow's work. I'll be cataloguing an old house up in the mountains. Want to come with me after school? Could be like a treasure hunt. Marcus's face lit up, the first genuine excitement she'd seen in weeks. Really? Can I help? Of course. You can be my assistant. And hey, she added, struck by sudden inspiration, you could bring your metal detector, the one Dad gave me. The one in the closet? Marcus's eyes widened. The metal detector had been Dan's last Christmas gift to her. A professional-grade model he'd bought because they'd planned to spend weekends beachcombing and exploring. It'd been used exactly twice before the accident, and since then had sat in the closet with the rest of the life they were supposed to have lived. That's the one. Maybe we'll find some old coins or historical artifacts around the property. Can we keep them if we do? We'll have to document them for the inventory, Sarah explained, but it'll still be exciting to discover them. As Marcus returned to his homework with renewed enthusiasm, Sarah continued her research. The Brenner family history was a classic American tale of innovation, wealth, and eventual decline. Cornelius had 3 sons, each of whom had expanded the family's industrial empire. But by the 3rd generation, the fortune had been largely depleted through poor investments and family disputes. Theodore Brenner, the last of the line, had retreated to the family cottage in the 1970s and lived there as a recluse until his death 3 years ago at the age of 91. Local newspaper archives painted a picture of an eccentric old man who rarely ventured into town, had his groceries delivered, and was occasionally seen walking the mountain paths at odd hours. There were letters to the editor complaining about strange lights from his property, unusual sounds at night, and concerns about environmental damage from whatever experiments he might be conducting. But nothing concrete, nothing official. One article from 2019 caught Sarah's attention. It was about a town council meeting where residents had petitioned to have the Brenner property inspected, citing safety concerns. Theodore Brenner had attended the meeting, his first public appearance in years, and delivered what the reporter described as a rambling but oddly compelling defense of his privacy rights. The council had ultimately sided with him, but the article noted that several council members had seemed unusually eager to drop the matter after Brenner produced certain historical documents relating to the town's founding and the Brenner family's role in it. "Finished," Marcus announced, closing his textbook with satisfaction. "Good job, buddy. Now go get ready for bed. Big day tomorrow." As Marcus headed to the bathroom to brush his teeth, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her supervisor at the pharmacy. "Sarah, I'm sorry to call so late," Janet began, and Sarah's stomach sank. Nothing good ever followed that opening. "I know you're scheduled for tomorrow night, but corporate just announced they're cutting hours across the board. I can only give you 1 shift this week instead of 3. Janet, "I need those hours," Sarah said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "Is there any way—" "I'm sorry. It's hitting everyone. Corporate says it's temporary, but—" Janet's voice trailed off. They both knew that temporary in retail speak usually meant until we figure out how to eliminate the position entirely. After ending the call, Sarah sat at the kitchen table running the numbers again. Without those pharmacy shifts, even with Hartley's promised bonus, she'd be short on rent, short on everything. She pulled up her banking app, looking at the checking account balance that never seemed to grow. 247.83. Savings account, 0.00. Credit cards, maxed out at $8,500 total. Minimum payments already overdue. Mom? Marcus stood in the doorway in his pajamas. Too small, she noticed with another pang. When had he grown so much? "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about tomorrow's adventure." "It's going to be great," Marcus said with the absolute confidence of childhood. "I bet we find something amazing, maybe even actual treasure. Then we could buy a house and a new car, and I could go to science camp and you wouldn't have to work at night anymore." Sarah's eyes stung with unshed tears. "That would be something, wouldn't it? Now off to bed. We need to get an early start." As she tucked him in, Marcus asked, "Do you think Dad would have liked treasure hunting?" "He would have loved it," Sarah assured him, smoothing his dark hair. "He always said the best adventures were the ones you didn't plan for." After Marcus fell asleep, Sarah returned to her research, determined to be as prepared as possible for the inventory job. She studied property layouts, Victorian architectural features, and estate cataloguing procedures. If she was going to earn that bonus, she'd need to be thorough and efficient. It was nearly midnight when she finally closed the laptop and prepared for bed. Through the thin walls of their apartment, she could hear their neighbors, the Johnsons, arguing about money again. The college students upstairs playing music too loud. Mrs. Park's television droning through the night because she couldn't sleep either. This was their life, compressed into 600 square feet of aging apartment complex, while somewhere in the Vermont mountains sat an abandoned Victorian cottage full of rooms no one had lived in for years. The next morning dawned grey and drizzly, typical for October in Vermont. Sarah woke Marcus early, made breakfast, oatmeal stretched with extra water to make it filling, and packed lunches for both of them. She'd already called the school to arrange for Marcus to take the late bus to the after-school program, explaining she had a work assignment that might run late. The company truck started on the third try, belching black smoke that made Sarah wince. She drove Marcus to school, kissing him goodbye at the entrance despite his protests that he was too old for public displays of affection. "I'll pick you up as soon as I can," she promised. "And remember, treasure hunt after school." "I'll be ready," Marcus assured her, clutching his backpack and the old metal detector she'd retrieved from the closet that morning. The drive to Ridgewood Mountain took her out of Millbrook's small downtown, past the abandoned factory that had once employed half the town, through increasingly rural landscape. The GPS signal began failing about 10 miles out, forcing her to rely on the hand-drawn map in Hartley's folder. The roads grew progressively worse, from patched asphalt to gravel to what was essentially a dirt trail carved through dense forest. Sarah white-knuckled the steering wheel as the truck bounced over ruts and roots, praying the aging vehicle would survive the journey. The trees pressed close on either side, their branches scraping the truck's sides like grasping fingers. No wonder the property had remained unsold for 3 years. Just getting there was an ordeal. When the cottage finally appeared through a break in the trees, Sarah gasped involuntarily. Despite decades of neglect, the Victorian architecture remained stunning. 3 stories of elaborate construction rose from a fieldstone foundation, complete with multiple gables, a wraparound porch supported by ornate columns, and a tower room that dominated the eastern corner. The exterior paint had long ago weathered to bare wood in most places, and vines had claimed much of the north wall, but the structure appeared remarkably solid. Sarah parked the truck and sat for a moment, taking in the scene. The cottage stood in what had once been a cleared meadow, now reclaimed by tall grass and wildflowers. Beyond it, the mountain rose steeply, covered in dense forest. No other buildings were visible in any direction, no power lines, no signs of civilization except the rutted track she'd just driven. The isolation was complete and somehow oppressive. In town, even in their cramped apartment, there was always the comfort of other people nearby. Here, if something went wrong, help was miles away on roads that might become impassable with a single heavy rain. Just an inventory, she told herself. Grabbing her supplies, clipboard, measuring tape, camera, flashlight, and the ring of keys from Hartley's folder. 3 days and $500. The front door key turned smoothly in the lock, which surprised her given the cottage's apparent abandonment. The door swung open on well-oiled hinges, revealing an interior that took her breath away. She stepped into a front hall that belonged in a museum. Despite layers of dust, the craftsmanship was extraordinary. Carved woodwork adorned every surface, door frames, baseboards, the magnificent staircase that curved up to the second floor. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper that might have been silk, its pattern still visible beneath the grime. A massive chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals grey with dust, but intact. Sarah moved forward carefully, her footsteps echoing on hardwood floors that creaked but felt solid. To her left, pocket doors opened into what must have been the formal parlour. Furniture sat shrouded in dust covers like ghosts holding court. To her right, a library with floor-to-ceiling. Bookshelves still packed with leather-bound volumes. The air smelled of age and abandonment, dust, old wood, mildew, and something else, something metallic and sharp that seemed to emanate from deeper in the house. Sarah made a note on her clipboard and began her systematic inventory, starting with the front hall. As she worked, documenting each piece of furniture, each architectural detail, each potential item of value, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching her. It was ridiculous, she knew. Houses didn't watch. But there was something about the quality of the silence, the way shadows seemed to shift in her peripheral vision, that kept her nerves on edge. The parlour yielded Victorian furniture that, while dusty, appeared to be in excellent condition. A horsehair sofa, matching chairs, marble-top tables, oil paintings in gilded frames. Any one piece might be worth more than she made in a month, if the right buyer could be found. She photographed everything carefully, made detailed notes about condition and distinctive features. The library was even more impressive. The books alone would require hours to catalogue properly. First editions, scientific journals, engineering manuals dating back to the 1800s. Theodore Brenner had apparently inherited not just his family's cottage, but their entire intellectual legacy. One whole section was devoted to books on hydroelectric engineering, dam construction, infrastructure design. Another held volumes on chemistry, physics, electrical engineering. But it was the dining room that made Sarah pause. The massive oak table was set for dinner. China plates, silver cutlery, crystal glasses, all covered in decades of dust, as if the occupants had simply vanished in the middle of a meal. A closer look revealed that the place settings were actually glued in place. The entire scene, a deliberate tableau. Why would someone do that? She was photographing the peculiar display when her phone buzzed. Marcus's school. Ms. Chen, I'm afraid there's been an incident. Marcus is fine, the secretary added quickly, but there was an altercation with some the students. He's in the principal's office. Sarah's heart sank. I'll be right there. There's no need to leave work. We've handled the situation. But the principal would like to schedule a meeting to discuss Marcus's social integration challenges. Social integration challenges. Bureaucratic speak for your kid is being bullied and we don't know what to do about it. Is he okay? can. I speak to him. He's returned to class. As I said, we've handled it. We'll send a note home with him explaining everything. After the call ended, Sarah stood in the dusty dining room, fighting the urge to abandon the inventory and rush to her son. But she couldn't afford to lose this job, couldn't afford to be seen as unreliable. Marcus was safe in class. She had to trust the school and focus on earning the money they desperately needed. She returned to her work with renewed determination, moving through the downstairs rooms with mechanical efficiency. Kitchen with its massive cast-iron stove and modern for the 1950s appliances. Butler's pantry with china services for dozens. A study that had clearly been Theodore's primary living space, with more recent furniture and a television from the 1990s. It was in the basement that things became interesting. The stairs down were newer than the rest of the house, reinforced concrete instead of wood. The basement itself was partially finished, with a workshop area that seemed incongruous with the Victorian aesthetic above. Modern electrical panels, industrial-grade wiring, ventilation systems that belonged in a laboratory rather than a residential basement. While measuring the space for the inventory, Sarah's trained eye caught the discrepancy immediately. The basement should have extended the full footprint of the house, but the eastern wall appeared to cut the space short by at least 15 feet. She'd worked with enough property layouts to recognize when something didn't add up. She knocked along the wall, listening. Most of it returned the solid thud of earth-backed stone, but near the corner, the sound changed, hollow, with a subtle echo. Sarah ran her fingers along the stones, feeling for any irregularity. The mortar here was different, newer, with a slightly different texture than the surrounding foundation. Part of her wanted to investigate further, but she could hear Dan's voice in her head. Curiosity is great, babe, but common sense keeps you safe. Whatever was behind that wall, it wasn't her business. She was here to catalogue what was visible, not go searching for secrets. She made a note about the basement dimensions on her inventory and headed back upstairs. By the time she finished documenting the ground floor, it was nearly 3 o'clock. Time to pick up Marcus. She could return tomorrow to tackle the upper floors, and if she worked efficiently, she might be able to complete the job in the allotted 3 days. The drive back down the mountain seemed even more treacherous than the ascent. The truck's worn tires struggled for purchase on the muddy track, and twice Sarah had to stop and carefully navigate around fallen branches. By the time she reached paved roads, her hands ached from gripping the steering wheel. She found Marcus in the school office, holding an ice pack to his left eye. Her heart clenched at the sight. "It's not that bad," he said quickly, seeing her expression. "You should see the other guy." "Marcus Chen, we do not joke about violence," Sarah said automatically, even as she gently moved the ice pack to examine his eye. It was already swelling, promising a spectacular bruise. "They were saying things about Dad," Marcus said quietly. "About how he must have been a loser because we're poor. I couldn't just let them—" "Oh, sweetheart." Sarah pulled him into a hug, feeling his thin shoulders shake slightly. "Dad was many things, but never a loser, and neither are we. We're just temporarily struggling." The principal, Mrs. Davies, emerged from her office with a practiced expression of concern. "Miss Chen, thank you for coming. I know you said you were working, but under the circumstances—" What followed was 20 minutes of educational jargon that essentially boiled down to, "Your son was provoked, but threw the first punch, so he's suspended for 2 days. The other boys involved received detention." Sarah wanted to argue about the unfairness, about the weeks of verbal bullying that had preceded this incident, but she could see the exhaustion in Mrs. Davies's eyes. The woman was trying to manage an underfunded school with too many kids and too few resources. Fighting her wouldn't help Marcus. "We'll make sure he keeps up with his schoolwork," Sarah promised, signing the required forms. "And we'll discuss appropriate ways to handle confrontation." As they walked to the truck, Marcus clutching his backpack and the metal detector, he said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I know we can't afford for me to miss school. Who's going to watch me while you work?" The weight of single parenthood crashed down on Sarah again. 2 days of suspension meant 2 days of lost work or expensive childcare. But looking at her son's bruised face, his dejected posture, she made a decision. "You're coming with me to the cottage tomorrow," she said. "You can help with the inventory. Think of it as a practical education in property management." "Really?" Marcus looked up hopefully. "I won't get in the way, I promise. I'll be super helpful." "I know you will. And maybe we'll even have time for some treasure hunting with that." Metal detector. That evening, after dinner and homework and ice packs and difficult conversations about handling bullies, Sarah sat at her laptop researching more about the Brenner property. She wanted to be prepared for any questions Marcus might have, and something about the basement discrepancy nagged at her. What she found in the deeper corners of the internet, local history forums, urban exploration blogs, conspiracy theory websites, painted a different picture of the Brenner legacy. According to these sources, Cornelius Brenner hadn't just built dams and power stations. He'd been involved in something called the Infrastructure Integration Initiative, a shadowy government program from the early 20th century aimed at embedding certain capabilities within civilian infrastructure projects. It sounded like paranoid fantasy except for the documentation. Scanned letters bearing official letterheads, photographs of Brenner with various government officials, references to dual-purpose installations and emergency protocols and subsurface networks. One post from a user claiming to be a retired civil engineer was particularly intriguing. "I worked on retrofitting several New England dams in the 1990s. 3 of them were original Brenner designs. In each case, we found anomalies, rooms that weren't on any blueprint, passages that served no apparent purpose, electrical systems that seemed designed to handle far more load than a dam would ever need. When I asked about it, I was told to ignore anything not directly related to our retrofit work. But I always wondered, what was Brenner really building?" Sarah closed the laptop, unsettled. Tomorrow, she'd have Marcus with her. Whatever secrets the Brenner cottage might hold, her priority was completing the inventory safely and earning that bonus. They needed the money too desperately to get distracted by conspiracy theories and hidden rooms. But as she lay in bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the apartment complex around her, she couldn't stop thinking about that hollow sound in the basement wall, about the industrial-grade electrical systems in a Victorian cottage, about Theodore Brenner's isolation and the local fears about his property. "Just an inventory," she reminded herself. 3 days and $500. She had no idea that tomorrow's return to the cottage would change everything, that her struggling existence was about to intersect with secrets buried for decades, that her careful, constrained life was about to explode into chaos that would test every survival instinct she'd developed as a single mother fighting to keep her small family afloat. For now, she simply pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and tried to find sleep, while somewhere in the mountains, the Brenner cottage stood empty in the darkness, waiting. The morning arrived, shrouded in mountain fog so thick that Sarah could barely see 20 feet ahead as she navigated the company truck up the winding road to the Brenner cottage. Marcus sat beside her, his black eye now a spectacular purple-green, clutching the metal detector across his lap like a talisman. He'd been unusually quiet during the drive, and Sarah suspected he was both excited about the adventure and anxious about the circumstances that had brought him here. "Remember the rules," Sarah said as they bounced over a particularly deep rut. "You stay where I can see you. No wandering off into the woods. No touching anything without asking first. And if you see or hear anything unusual, you tell me immediately." "No, Mom," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a hint of preteen exasperation. "You've only told me like 50 times. 51 now." Sarah said, managing a smile despite her exhaustion. She'd been up most of the night, partly researching the Brenner property and partly wrestling with their financial crisis. The online banking app had become her late-night torture device. Refresh, calculate, despair, repeat. Even with Hartley's promised bonus, they'd still be short on rent. But she couldn't think about that now. One crisis at a time. The cottage materialized from the fog, like something from a ghost story, its Gothic tower disappearing into the grey mist above. The isolation felt even more pronounced today, as if the fog had cut them off from the rest of the world entirely. Sarah parked the truck in the same spot as yesterday, noting that the grass still bore the marks of her previous visit. No one else had been here, or at least no one had driven here. Whoa, Marcus breathed, getting his first look at the cottage. It's like something from those horror games Kevin plays. You know, the ones where... Let's focus on it being a beautiful example of Victorian architecture, Sarah interrupted, not wanting to feed into any spooky narratives that might make their work here more difficult. Built in 1891 by Cornelius Brenner, who was a famous engineer. The one who built all those dams, Marcus asked, surprising her with his retention of last night's research discussion. That's right. Come on, let's get our supplies inside. They unloaded the truck. Sarah's inventory materials, lunch first, aid kit and extra flashlights she'd borrowed from their emergency supplies. The front door opened as smoothly as it had yesterday, and they stepped into the dusty grandeur of the entrance hall. Marcus's eyes went wide as he took in the carved woodwork, the sweeping staircase, the crystal chandelier. We could fit our whole apartment in just this room, he said softly. The comment pierced Sarah's heart. She'd wanted to give Marcus so much more than their cramped apartment, their constant financial stress, their life of careful calculations and small disappointments. But here they were, cataloguing someone else's abandoned wealth. Let's set up our base in the kitchen, she suggested, leading him through the house. Good light, big table to work on, and running water if we need it. The kitchen, with its mix of Victorian bones and mid-century updates, seemed to fascinate Marcus. He examined the massive cast-iron stove, the butler's bells that would have summoned servants, the dumbwaiter that connected to the upper floors. People really lived like this? He asked. Some people did, Sarah confirmed, setting up her laptop and paperwork on the large wooden table. The Brenners were very wealthy from all of Cornelius's engineering projects. But remember, wealth doesn't always bring happiness. Theodore Brenner died here all alone. Still, Marcus said, running his hand along the marble countertop, it would be nice to try being rich, just to see. Sarah couldn't argue with that logic. She pulled out her inventory sheets from yesterday, reviewing what still needed to be documented. Okay, here's the plan. I need to finish cataloguing the second and third floors today. You can help by taking photographs of anything I point out and by being my assistant measuring rooms. Think you can handle that? Definitely, Marcus brightened. At being given real responsibility, what about the metal detector? After lunch, if we're making good progress, we can take a break and you can scan around the property. Deal? Deal. They started with the second floor, climbing the grand staircase that seemed built for dramatic entrances in evening gowns. Not a tired single mother in thrift store jeans and her suspended fifth grader. The second floor hallway stretched in both directions, with doors opening onto bedrooms that had housed generations of Brenners. The first bedroom revealed more Victorian excess, a four-poster bed that could have slept a small family, wardrobes that dwarfed modern closets, and windows, offering spectacular views of the fog-shrouded mountain. Sarah dictated observations while Marcus dutifully photographed each item, each angle, proving to be a more conscientious assistant than she'd expected. This furniture is all handmade, Sarah explained, running her hand along the intricate carvings. On a dresser, see these dovetail joints? That's craftsmanship you don't see anymore. Why not? Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Too expensive, too time-consuming. Modern furniture is mass-produced in factories. So this stuff is valuable? Sarah consulted her notes and the preliminary research she'd done on antique furniture. Values. This bedroom suite alone could be worth $10,000 to $15,000 to the right collector. Marcus's eyes widened. And there are like 6 bedrooms up here. 5 on this floor, 2 more in the tower, Sarah confirmed. But remember, this all belongs to the bank now. We're just creating a record of what's here. They moved systematically through the rooms, each revealing its own character. The master bedroom, clearly Theodore's, was more Spartan than the others. A simple metal bed frame, functional furniture, and curiously, dozens of notebooks stacked on every surface. Sarah flipped through a few, finding them filled with cramped handwriting in what appeared to be some kind of code or cipher. "Ma'am, look at this," Marcus called from near the window. He'd found a telescope, an expensive-looking model pointed toward the valley below. "Think it still works?" Sarah peered through the eyepiece, adjusting the focus until the fog-shrouded landscape came into partial clarity. Even with the limited visibility, she could see why Theodore had positioned it here. The view commanded the entire approach to the property. No one could come up the mountain road without being observed from this vantage point. "Paranoid much?" she muttered. "What?" "Nothing. Let's keep moving." The tower rooms were accessed by a narrow spiral staircase that made Sarah grip the rail tightly. The first level of the tower had been converted into what looked like a study or observation post. Maps covered the walls, not just of Vermont, but of the entire Northeast, marked with pins and string connecting various locations. Most of the pins seemed to mark infrastructure projects, dams, power stations, bridges. "It's like one of those conspiracy theory boards in movies," Marcus observed, and Sarah had to agree. Red string connected seemingly random locations, and notes in Theodore's cramped handwriting covered the margins of the maps. The upper tower room was even stranger. Electronic equipment lined the walls, radio receivers, signal monitors, devices. Sarah couldn't identify. Everything was decades old, but had been maintained meticulously. Power cables snaked across the floor to a central console that looked like it belonged in a Cold War bunker, not a Victorian cottage. "What is all this stuff?" Marcus asked, reaching toward a panel of switches. "Don't touch," Sarah warned. "And I have no idea. Maybe Theodore was into ham radio, but even as she said it, she knew this was far beyond hobbyist equipment. This was professional-grade surveillance or communication gear, the kind of thing that required significant expertise and even more significant funding. She photographed everything carefully, making detailed notes about model numbers and configurations that might help identify the equipment's purpose later. It was nearly noon by the time they finished the second floor and tower. Sarah's inventory, sheets, were filling up with an increasingly strange collection of items: antique furniture mixed with modern electronics, Victorian decorations alongside technical manuals, family heirlooms, and what appeared to be surveillance equipment. "Lunch break," Marcus suggested hopefully. "Good idea. Let's eat, then you can do some metal detecting while I start on the 3rd floor." They returned to the kitchen, where Sarah had packed sandwiches and fruit. Sitting at the large wooden table, surrounded by the cottage's oppressive silence, she watched her son eat with the focused intensity of a growing boy. The bruise around his eye had darkened, but his spirit seemed good. Maybe this suspension would turn out to be a blessing. Time away from his tormentors, a chance for an adventure. "Mom," Marcus said between bites, "what do you think Mr. Brenner was doing with all that equipment upstairs?" The sight of strangers with boxes and packing materials entering my home without my permission, under Victoria's direction, was so shocking that for a moment I could only stand frozen in disbelief. This wasn't family pressure or emotional manipulation. This was an actual attempt to forcibly relocate me against my will. "Stop immediately," I commanded, my voice carrying the authority I had developed through decades of professional negotiations. You have no right to enter my home with moving personnel, and I am not relocating anywhere. Victoria's response revealed the full extent of her sense of entitlement and control. Eleanor, we've been patient with your denial and resistance, but this situation has gone on long enough. Michael and I have legal responsibility for your well-being, and we're not going to stand by and watch you endanger yourself out of stubborn attachment to a house you can't properly maintain. The claim of legal responsibility for my well-being was both false and deeply revealing. Victoria was either genuinely deluded about having legal authority over my affairs, or she was deliberately using false claims to justify her actions, neither possibility reflecting well on her character or judgment. You have no legal authority over me or my property, I informed her clearly, positioning myself between the workers and my living room, where family photographs and personal belongings had already been placed in boxes without my consent. I am legally competent, financially independent, and entirely capable of making my own decisions about my living situation. What followed was the confrontation that would forever define our relationship and mark the point of no return in Victoria's campaign to control my life and assets. With the moving workers as unwilling witnesses to our family conflict, Victoria abandoned all pretense of concern and revealed the calculating entitlement that had been driving her behavior all along. "Get out! This isn't your home anymore!" she screamed, her composure completely shattered by my continued resistance to her control. "You're a burden, you're unsafe, and you're being selfish and unreasonable. Michael and I have planned your future, and you're going to accept it whether you like it or not." Standing in the kitchen, where I had prepared thousands of meals for my family, where Thomas and I had shared coffee and conversation every morning for 45 years, where Michael had done homework at the counter and learned to cook alongside his father, I felt something fundamental break inside me that could never be repaired. The words, "This isn't your home anymore," from the woman who had never contributed a single day of work or dollar of investment to the house Thomas and I had built together, revealed the depth of her sense of entitlement and the complete absence of respect for my autonomy, my history or my rights. But what Victoria didn't realize, as she stood in my kitchen, directing strangers to pack my belongings against my will, was that her campaign to force me out of my home had triggered preparations she couldn't possibly imagine. The quiet, aging mother-in-law she saw as an obstacle to her ambitions was about to reveal resources and strategic positioning that would transform our entire family dynamic. The foundation Thomas and I had built together, both literal and financial, was far more solid and strategically positioned than Victoria's aggressive confidence could shake. And within 6 months, the woman who had tried to force me out of my family home would discover exactly who really held the keys to her future. The game Victoria thought she was winning was about to change in ways she never could have anticipated. And the rules of that new game would be written by someone who understood both property law and family loyalty far better than she had ever imagined. After Victoria's explosive outburst and the humiliating scene with the moving truck, I made a decision that would change everything. Standing in my violated kitchen, surrounded by boxes packed without my permission, I looked at my son, the man Thomas and I had raised to value integrity and respect, and saw a stranger who had allowed his wife to orchestrate an attempted forced relocation of his own mother. "Michael," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake of emotions coursing through me, "I want you and Victoria to leave my home immediately. When you're ready to have a conversation based on respect rather than coercion, you know where to find me." Victoria's face flushed with fury at being dismissed from what she clearly considered her domain to control. "You can't throw us out. We're trying to help you, and you're being completely unreasonable. This is my home," I replied with calm finality, "and I'm asking you to leave now. The moving workers, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama they had witnessed, quickly departed with their unused boxes and packing materials. Victoria continued her protests, but Michael, perhaps recognizing something in my tone that reminded him of his father's quiet authority, finally convinced her to leave. Alone in my house for the first time in months, without the shadow of Victoria's manipulative presence, I allowed myself exactly 1 hour to grieve. I sat in Thomas's old armchair, surrounded by the life we had built together, and acknowledged the devastating reality that my relationship with my son might be permanently damaged by the choices he had made and the influence he had allowed to reshape his values. But after that hour of grief, I shifted into the strategic mindset that had made me successful in commercial real estate for 4 decades. Victoria had made a crucial error in her campaign. She had revealed the full extent of her intentions and methods while underestimating both my capabilities and my preparations. Now it was time to show her exactly what she was actually dealing with. That evening, I made a series of phone calls that would begin the process of transforming our family dynamic in ways Victoria could never have anticipated. The first call was to Harrison and Associates, the premier property law firm in our region, where I had maintained a professional relationship for over 20 years through my appraisal work. "James, this is Eleanor Hartwell," I said to James Harrison, the senior partner. "I need to schedule a consultation regarding some family property matters that have become urgent. I believe it's time to implement some strategies we discussed several years ago." The second call was to Margaret Stonefield, a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud and elder abuse cases. Her services weren't something I had ever expected to need within my own family, but Victoria's systematic campaign and documented deceptions had created a situation requiring professional intervention. "Margaret, I need a comprehensive investigation into someone who may be attempting to manipulate my financial affairs through fraudulent means," I explained. "I have documentation of forged medical consultations, unauthorized property assessments, and what appears to be a systematic campaign of coercion. This is a family member, so discretion is essential, but accuracy is even more important." The third call was to David Chen, my longtime colleague from the Regional Appraisers Association, who had recently expanded his firm into property management and investment consulting. "David, do you remember that conversation we had about strategic property positioning for retirement security? I think it's time to move forward with some of those ideas we discussed. I have a situation that requires both immediate protection and long-term strategic advantage." Over the following week, while Victoria and Michael apparently assumed their pressure campaign had succeeded in breaking my resistance, I was actually implementing a series of legal and financial maneuvers that had been years in the planning. What they didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that Thomas and I had begun strategic estate and asset protection planning shortly after his retirement, working with specialists to ensure that our life's work would be protected from exactly the kind of exploitation Victoria was attempting. The foundation of my counter-strategy was something Victoria's focus on my house had caused her to completely overlook: the fact that Thomas and I hadn't just been homeowners building equity in a single property. We had been systematic real estate investors for over 3 decades, quietly acquiring properties throughout Millbrook Heights and the surrounding region, often purchasing distressed buildings that my professional eye could identify as undervalued opportunities. Our investment strategy had been methodical and conservative, buying properties below market value, making careful improvements that increased both rent potential and long-term value, then either holding them as rental income or selling them at strategic times when market conditions were optimal. Thomas handled the renovation planning and contractor management, while I provided professional market analysis and property evaluation. By the time Thomas passed away, our portfolio included 14 rental properties throughout the region, ranging from small apartment buildings to historic commercial spaces that we had rescued from demolition and carefully restored. The total value of this portfolio had grown to over $3.2 million, generating monthly rental income that, combined with our retirement savings and investments, made me far more financially secure than either Victoria or Michael realized. What made this particularly relevant to Victoria's campaign was something she couldn't possibly have known. One of our investment properties was the entire building that housed Willowbrook Estate's sales office, the very facility where Victoria worked as a marketing director for Prestige Property Group. "Mom, look at this," Marcus called from another section of shelving. He'd found a box of photographs showing construction projects, each labeled with location and date. Sarah recognized some of them, major infrastructure projects throughout New England, many of them bearing the Brenner name as primary contractor. Another box contained technical schematics that made Sarah's head spin, complex diagrams showing how civilian infrastructure could be rapidly converted for military or emergency use, dams that could be used to flood valleys, power stations with hidden transmission capabilities, water systems with integrated chemical dispersal systems. "This is insane," Sarah muttered, her mind struggling to process the implications. If these documents were genuine, and they certainly appeared to be, then much of New England's infrastructure had been built with hidden dual purposes. And the Brenner family had been central to the entire program. The vault door drew her attention like a magnet. Unlike the hidden entrance, this had an electronic lock with a keypad. The mechanism was at least 30 years old, but sophisticated for its time. Without the code, they wouldn't be getting inside. "Try Dad's birthday," Marcus suggested. "That's what you use for everything." "This isn't our Netflix password," Sarah said, but she was studying the keypad. The numbers 4, 7, and 3 showed more wear than the others, suggesting they were used most frequently. A 3-digit code, 4 digits. She thought about Theodore Brenner, about his obsessive documentation, his coded notebooks upstairs. "We should go," she said suddenly, the weight of their discovery crashing down on her. This is too big. We need to tell someone." "Tell who?" Marcus asked. "The police? The government? Mom, this is the government. Or at least it was." He was right, and that realization chilled her. Who could they trust with this information? Who would even believe them? And more importantly, who might already know about this place and be very interested in keeping it secret? As if in answer to her thoughts, a sound echoed from above, the distinctive creak of the cottage's front door opening. Sarah grabbed Marcus, pulling him behind one of the equipment racks. She clicked off her flashlight and motioned for him to do the same, plunging them into absolute darkness. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure it would give them away. Footsteps moved across the floor above them, measured and deliberate. Not the cautious exploration of another urban explorer or potential buyer, but the confident movement of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The basement door opened. Light spilled down from above, and Sarah heard voices. At least 2 people, speaking in low, professional tones. The monitoring system triggered yesterday afternoon and again an hour ago, a male voice said. "Someone's definitely been inside." "Could be kids, urban explorers," a female voice responded. "The property's been sitting empty for 3 years." "Maybe, but with the anniversary coming up, we can't take chances. Check the perimeter. I'll verify the seal." "The anniversary of what?" Sarah held Marcus tighter, feeling him tremble against her. They were trapped. The spiral staircase was the only way out, and it led directly to whoever was in the basement above. The footsteps moved across the basement, stopping at what must be the hidden entrance. Sarah heard a soft curse. "It's open," the male voice said. "The seal's been broken. Someone's inside." Should we call for backup? Not yet. Could be a false alarm. The mechanism's 40 years old. But stay alert. A flashlight beam cut through. The darkness of the hidden chamber sweeping across the room. Sarah pressed herself and Marcus deeper into the shadows behind the equipment rack, praying the metal shelving would hide them. The beam passed over their hiding spot once, twice. Sarah held her breath. Marcus buried his face against her shoulder. The light moved on, examining the filing boxes they'd disturbed, the open containers. "Someone's definitely been through the materials," the woman reported. "Recent disturbance, probably within the last hour. Check the vault." Footsteps approached their position. Sarah's mind raced through options, finding none that didn't end badly. They were trespassing in what was clearly a classified government facility. Who would believe they'd found it by accident? Who would protect them from whatever consequences came from this discovery? The footsteps stopped mere feet from their hiding place. Sarah could see the edge of a black boot, military or law enforcement style. Another step, and they'd be discovered. Then, Marcus's metal detector, propped against the wall where he'd left it at the entrance above, fell over with a clatter that echoed through the basement. What was that? The female voice, sharp with alertness. "Upstairs. You check it out. I'll secure this area." One set of footsteps retreated up the spiral staircase. The remaining person, the man, continued his methodical search of the chamber. Sarah knew they had minutes, maybe seconds, before he found them. She felt Marcus tense beside her, ready to run, and squeezed his shoulder in warning. Running would only make things worse. Their only hope was to remain hidden until an opportunity presented itself. The man was examining the open filing boxes now, speaking into what must be a radio. "Confirm multiple breaches of archived materials. Documents from the Clearwater Protocol have been accessed. No sign of removal, but someone's been reading the classified files. Any indication who?" The woman's voice crackled through the radio. "Negative, but..." He paused and Sarah heard him picking up something. "There's fresh mud on the floor, still damp. Someone tracked it in recently." Sarah's heart sank. Their shoes would have mud from the ground outside where Marcus had been. Metal detecting. A clear trail leading directly to their hiding spot if the man thought to follow it. "I'm coming back down," the woman reported. "Found a metal detector upstairs, and the kitchen shows signs of recent use. Someone had lunch here. Locals. Kids. Maybe. Or maybe someone finally figured out what Theodore was guarding all these years." The man's flashlight beam swept the room again, more slowly this time. "Margaret, we may have a problem. The mud trail leads behind the equipment racks." Sarah felt Marcus press against her, his breathing rapid and scared. She made a decision that went against every instinct but seemed their only option. "We're here," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "We're coming out. Please don't shoot or anything. I have my son with me." "Mom," Marcus whispered, horrified. "It's okay," she whispered back, though she wasn't sure it was. They emerged from behind the equipment rack, hands raised, squinting in the harsh glare of tactical flashlights. Two figures in dark clothing stood before them. Not quite military, not quite law enforcement, but something in between. Both had weapons holstered at their sides, though neither had drawn them. The man was older, perhaps 60, with grey hair and cold blue eyes. The woman was younger, maybe 40, with an alert, intelligent face that was currently set in hard lines. "Well," the man said after a long moment, "this is unexpected. Margaret, we have civilians, a woman and a child." "I can see that, Robert," Margaret replied, her tone suggesting this complicated rather than simplified matters. "We're sorry," Sarah began, her arms still raised. Marcus pressed close to her side. "We were just doing an inventory for the property management company. We found the hidden door by accident. We didn't mean to..." "Stop talking," Robert instructed, not unkindly. "First things first, are you armed?" "No." "Are you alone? Anyone else in the cottage or on the property?" "Just us. I'm Sarah Chen. This is my son Marcus. I work for Hartley Property Management. We're supposed to be cataloguing the contents for the bank. I have documentation in my bag upstairs. The two exchanged glances. Margaret spoke into her radio. Perimeter check? Clear, came the response. No vehicles except the rust bucket truck. No signs of anyone else. Ma'am, Robert said, his weapon still holstered but his hand resting near it. You and your son have wandered into a situation considerably more complex than a simple property inventory. This facility is restricted, and the materials you've been examining are classified. We didn't know, Sarah protested. The cottage was supposed to be empty. We just found— What you found, Margaret interrupted, is a Cold War relic that should have been properly decommissioned decades ago. Theodore Brenner was supposed to be maintaining security, not letting the place rot until civilians could stumble in. Is that what this is? Sarah asked, genuine curiosity overcoming fear. Some kind of Cold War bunker? Robert almost smiled. Something like that. The question now is what to do with you. Please, Sarah said, pulling Marcus closer. We won't tell anyone. We just want to leave. I need this job. We need— Mom, Marcus interrupted, his voice small but determined. Tell them about the other stuff. Sarah looked down at him, confused. What other stuff? The notebooks upstairs, the ones in code, and the maps with all the infrastructure marked. If Mr. Brenner was supposed to be guarding this place, why was he tracking all that other stuff? Margaret and Robert exchanged another look, this one longer and more concerned. What notebooks? Margaret asked. And so, reluctantly, Sarah found herself describing what they'd found in the cottage, the surveillance equipment, the coded journals, the maps marking infrastructure sites across New England, the boxes of soil and water samples. He wasn't just guarding this place, Sarah concluded. He was researching something, monitoring something. Robert pulled out a satellite phone and stepped away to make a call. Margaret kept watch over Sarah and Marcus, her expression thoughtful. How old are you, Marcus? She asked. 10, he answered, then added with a touch of defiance, and 3/4. Smart kid. Figured out the connection between the basement anomaly and the external ground disturbance. You take after your mom? My dad, Marcus said quietly. He was an engineer. Was? He died, Sarah said shortly, not wanting to get into personal history. With these people, Robert returned, his expression grim. We have a situation. Upstairs wants us to secure the facility and bring them in for debriefing. Both of them? Margaret asked. The kid too? Especially the kid. He's been exposed to classified materials. This is insane, Sarah protested. We didn't do anything wrong. We were hired to do a job. We found a hidden door. That's not a crime. No, Robert agreed. But what you've stumbled into involves national security protocols that are still technically active. We need to understand exactly what you've seen and what you might have documented. Documented? Sarah felt her phone in her pocket like a lead weight. She had taken photos, dozens of them, of the cottage contents and, yes, of this chamber and some of the documents. Evidence of their discovery, she'd thought. Insurance. Margaret seemed to read her expression. Hand over any cameras, phones recording. Devices. We'll need to review any documentation you've created. Sarah reluctantly pulled out her phone and camera, watching as Margaret sealed them in evidence bags. Marcus did the same with the small digital camera he'd been using to help with. The inventory. Now what? Sarah asked. Now, Robert said, we go upstairs, collect your belongings and take a ride. There are people who need to hear what you've discovered. People who've been looking for this place for a very long time. As they climbed the spiral staircase out of the hidden chamber, Sarah's mind raced. What had started as a simple inventory job had become something out of a conspiracy thriller. But this was real. The fear in her chest, the concern for Marcus, the uncertainty of what came next. At the top of the stairs, Margaret turned to seal the hidden entrance. The wall swung closed with a grinding finality, once again concealing the chamber below. But the secret was out now, and Sarah had the sinking feeling that their lives had just taken a turn from which there would be no going back. "Mom," Marcus whispered as they gathered their things from the kitchen. "Are we in trouble?" Sarah wished she had a reassuring answer, but as she watched Robert and Margaret move with professional efficiency, preparing to transport them to who knew where, all she could manage was, "I don't know, baby. I really don't know." The fog had lifted while they were underground, revealing the cottage in stark afternoon light. As they were led to a black SUV with government plates, Sarah took one last look at the Victorian structure that had seemed so innocent just hours ago. Somewhere in its bones lay secrets that powerful people had worked to keep hidden for decades, and now she and Marcus were part of that secret, whether they wanted to be or not. The SUV's doors closed with a sound like fate sealing. As they drove down the mountain road, Sarah held Marcus's hand and wondered if their lives would ever be simple again. The $500 bonus that had seemed so important this morning now felt like a joke, the least of their concerns, in a situation that grew more complex and dangerous with each passing moment. Behind them, the Brenner cottage receded into the trees, keeping its remaining secrets. But the biggest secret was out, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that discovering it had set in motion events that would ripple far beyond a struggling single mother and her son just trying to survive. The game had changed. The only question now was whether they were players or pawns. The black SUV wound down from the mountain with practiced efficiency, Robert driving while Margaret sat in the back with Sarah and Marcus, her posture relaxed but alert. They hadn't been restrained. Small comfort, but Sarah recognized the child locks were engaged and the windows were the kind that didn't open. Professional courtesies wrapped around a steel core of control. Marcus pressed against her side, his earlier bravado evaporating into 10-year-old uncertainty. Sarah kept one arm around him, while her mind catalogued everything she'd seen, everything that might explain their current situation. The documents had mentioned Project Clearwater, infrastructure integration, strategic reserves. Terms that meant nothing to her, but had clearly meant everything to someone once upon a time. "Where are we going?" she finally asked as they reached the main road. "Burlington Field Office," Margaret replied. "It's secure, comfortable, and has people who can properly assess what you've discovered." "What field office? FBI? CIA? Who are you people exactly?" Robert glanced in the rearview mirror. "Consider us legacy management. Some projects officially end, but never really die. They just shift to caretaker status." "Like Theodore Brenner was a caretaker?" "Theodore was supposed to be a caretaker," Margaret corrected. "Instead, it seems he was conducting his own investigation. Those materials you described, the monitoring equipment, the coded journals, the infrastructure mapping, none of that was part of his mandate." The drive took an hour, during which Sarah learned little more despite careful probing. Her handlers, for that's clearly what they were, remained professionally vague about everything except immediate logistics. Marcus had fallen into stressed silence, occasionally squeezing her hand when the reality of their situation seemed to overwhelm him. The Burlington Field Office turned out to be a nondescript building in an office park, distinguished only by better-than-average security and a notable lack of signage. They were processed through multiple checkpoints, with the kind of efficiency that spoke of long practice, finally arriving at what appeared to be a small conference room that had been hastily converted to an interview space. "Can I call my employer?" Sarah asked as they were seated at a metal table. "He'll be expecting us back with the inventory." "In time," Robert said. "First, we need to understand exactly what you've found and what you've done with that information." What followed was 3 hours of detailed debriefing. They wanted to know everything. how she'd gotten the job, what she'd found in the cottage, how they'd discovered the hidden chamber, what documents they'd examined, what photographs they'd taken. Sarah answered as honestly as she could, sensing that lies would only make things worse. Marcus, to his credit, remained composed despite the intimidating circumstances, adding details she'd forgotten and correcting her timeline when stress made her jumble events. Throughout the questioning, Sarah noticed things. The way Margaret and Robert exchanged glances at certain revelations, the particular interest they showed in Theodore's monitoring activities, the careful way they avoided confirming or denying her speculation about Project Clearwater's purpose. "The infrastructure integration program," Sarah finally said directly. "That's what this is about, isn't it? Civilian projects with hidden military applications?" Margaret's expression didn't change. "What makes you think that? The documents were pretty clear. Dams with flood control capabilities that went beyond normal parameters. Power stations with transmission capacities that exceeded civilian needs. Water treatment facilities with chemical dispersal systems." Sarah drew on her property management knowledge, the countless infrastructure assessments she'd reviewed. "It's actually brilliant in a terrifying way. Hide strategic assets in plain sight." "Mom," Marcus said quietly, "maybe we shouldn't—" "No," Sarah interrupted, frustration overwhelming caution. "We're already here. We've already seen it. Pretending we don't understand won't make us safer." Robert leaned back in his chair. "You're right. Partial knowledge is often more dangerous than full understanding." "Yes. Project Clearwater was a Cold War program to create dual-use infrastructure. In the event of invasion or catastrophic emergency, critical systems could be rapidly converted to defensive purposes." "Invasion?" Marcus asked, his voice small. "Like enemy soldiers?" "It was a different time," Margaret explained, her tone gentler when addressing him. "The 1950s through 1980s were dominated by the fear of Soviet invasion or nuclear war. Programs like Clearwater were insurance policies, ways to ensure that even if conventional defenses failed, we'd have options. But the Cold War ended 30 years ago," Sarah pointed out. "Why maintain the secrecy?" "Because infrastructure doesn't have an expiration date," Robert replied. "Those capabilities still exist, embedded in systems across New England. In the wrong hands, that knowledge could be catastrophically misused. Or in the right hands, it could be exposed as a massive violation of public trust," Sarah countered. "People have a right to know if their water supply can be weaponized." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Margaret's friendly demeanor hardened. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes this situation complicated." Before anyone could respond, the door opened. A younger agent entered, handing Margaret a tablet. Her expression grew increasingly grim as she read. "We have a problem," she announced. "Local news just picked up a story about strange government vehicles at the Brenner property. Someone got drone footage of our SUVs. Social media is lighting up with conspiracy theories." Robert cursed under his breath. "How?" "Best guess. Someone was already watching the property. Maybe urban explorers, maybe journalists following up on the old Theodore Brenner stories." Margaret showed them the tablet. Shaky drone footage clearly showed their vehicles at the cottage, along with a glimpse of Sarah and Marcus being led to the SUV. "Wait," Sarah said, studying the footage. "This was taken after we were already inside the chamber. Someone was watching the whole time?" "It appears so." Margaret's fingers flew across the tablet. "And it gets worse. The footage has been picked up by several larger outlets. Government raid on historic Vermont property raises questions. We're about 6 hours from this going national." "Then we need to control the narrative," Robert said immediately. "Standard protocols—" He was interrupted by Sarah's phone, sealed, in its evidence bag, beginning to ring insistently. Then Marcus's camera beeped with incoming messages. Then Margaret's secure phone chimed. Then Robert's. "What the hell?" Margaret muttered, checking her device. "How did anyone get this number?" Sarah could see her own phone's screen through the plastic bag. Dozens of missed calls, text messages scrolling past. Hartley Property Management. Unknown numbers. Her apartment. Complex, Marcus's school. Let me answer, she said urgently. Please. If I've been gone this long without contact, people will worry. Marcus's school will... Mom, Marcus interrupted, pointing at the tablet Margaret had set down. The news feed was updating in real time, and a new headline made Sarah's blood run. Cold. Missing Vermont mother and son last seen at mysterious government facility. Missing? Sarah grabbed the tablet. The article included their photos. Hers from the property management website, Marcus's from his school portrait. It described how they'd failed to return from a routine inventory job, how their vehicle was found abandoned at the property, how government agents were seen removing them from the scene. This is insane, she breathed. We're not missing. We're sitting right here. From the outside perspective, you've disappeared into federal custody without explanation, Margaret said. Someone is very cleverly turning this into a story. Someone who knew we'd be there, Robert added thoughtfully, who knew about the cottage's secrets and waited for someone to discover them. Another update appeared on the news feed. This time, it was a video, jerky handheld footage from inside the cottage. Sarah recognized the tower room with its monitoring equipment, the maps with their red strings, the coded notebooks. A voice narrated breathlessly about secret government surveillance and decades of hidden operations. That was taken yesterday, Sarah realized. Before we even arrived today, someone else has been in the cottage. Multiple parties converging on a secret that's been dormant for decades, Robert mused. The question is why now? Sarah thought about Theodore Brenner dying 3 years ago, the property sitting in probate, finally coming available for inventory. Maybe Theodore wasn't just a caretaker. Maybe he was actively keeping people away. With him gone, the secret was vulnerable, Margaret finished, and someone was waiting. Marcus tugged on Sarah's sleeve. Mom, look! He pointed to the news feed where a new player had entered the game. A young woman with press credentials was doing a live report from outside their very building, somehow having identified and located the government facility where they were being held. This is Alyssa Conway reporting live from Burlington, where sources indicate Sarah and Marcus Chen are being detained in connection with their discovery at the Brenner property. We're demanding answers about why a mother and child have been taken into custody for simply doing their job. How did she find us so fast? Margaret demanded. More notifications flooded in. The story was spreading like wildfire, each iteration adding new layers of conspiracy and speculation. Secret government programs, missing civilians, hidden facilities. It was a perfect storm of elements guaranteed to capture public attention. We need to make a statement, Sarah said suddenly. Show people we're safe, that this is all a misunderstanding. Absolutely not, Robert said. Any statement you make will only fuel the fire. As opposed to our silence, which is clearly calming everyone down, Sarah shot back. Look at this. They're turning us into victims of some shadowy government conspiracy. My face is on the news. Marcus's face is on the news. Our lives are being turned upside down, and you want us to stay quiet. Her phone rang again. This time she could see it was Hartley. Then her landlord. Then a number she recognized as a reporter, who'd contacted the property management office before about various stories. At least let me tell people we're safe, she pleaded. My boss thinks I've been abducted. Marcus's school probably has the police involved by now. Margaret and Robert exchanged looks. Finally, Margaret unsealed Sarah's phone and handed it to her. 5 minutes, stick to facts. You're safe, you're cooperating with authorities regarding a discovery at the property. You'll be home soon. Nothing about Clearwater, nothing about the chamber, nothing specific. Sarah's hands shook as she dialed Hartley first. He answered on the first ring, his usually gruff voice high with stress. "Sarah, Jesus Christ, where are you? The police are here. The news says you've been taken by government agents." "What the hell is happening?" "Mr. Hartley, I'm fine. Marcus is fine. We're cooperating with federal authorities about something we found at the cottage. It's complicated, but we're safe." "Found? What did you find?" "The cops are asking about the inventory, about what might be in that cottage. I've got reporters calling every 5 minutes." Sarah chose her words carefully, aware that Margaret and Robert were listening. "We discovered some materials that needed federal review. Historical documents. We're helping them understand what we found." "Historical... Are you in trouble?" "Do you need a lawyer? I know this guy." "We're not in trouble," Sarah said, hoping it was true. "We just need to finish here and then we'll be home. Can you please tell the school that Marcus is with me and safe?" Yeah, of course. But Sarah, the news is going crazy. They're saying the cottage has some kind of secret government facility. They're saying you found evidence of... "I have to go," Sarah interrupted. "We're safe. That's what matters. I'll explain everything when I can." She ended the call, her heart racing. In just those few minutes, several more news alerts had appeared on the tablet. The story was mutating, growing, taking on a life of its own. "I need to call the school," she said. "They need to know Marcus is safe." But before she could dial, the conference room door burst open. A woman in a severe suit entered, followed by 2 men in similar attire. Everything about them screamed higher authority. "Agent Martinez, Agent Cole," the woman said, not bothering to acknowledge Sarah and Marcus. "What exactly is the situation here?" Margaret, Agent Martinez apparently, straightened. "Ma'am, civilians discovered the Clearwater archive at the Brenner site. We secured them for debriefing, but someone has weaponized the situation media-wise." "Can see that?" the woman said coldly. "I have the secretary asking why Vermont conspiracy theories are trending #1 on social media. The president's press secretary wants to know what statement to make, and I have approximately 0 useful information to give them because somehow a routine cleanup operation has become a public relations nightmare." "With respect, ma'am," Robert, Agent Cole interjected, "this wasn't routine. Someone was waiting for this discovery. The media response was too fast, too coordinated." The woman finally looked at Sarah and Marcus, her expression calculating. "Ms. Chen, your accidental discovery has created a significant problem. Project Clearwater's existence becoming public knowledge could have serious ramifications." "For who?" Sarah asked, finding courage in anger. "For the people who might discover their town's water supply has a secret military function? For citizens who deserve to know what their government built into their infrastructure? For national security," the woman replied flatly. "Those capabilities exist for extreme scenarios. Making them public makes them vulnerable. Or makes the public aware of what's been done without their consent," Sarah countered. "Mom," Marcus whispered, but Sarah was beyond caution now. "You built weapons into civilian infrastructure. You hid it for decades. And now you want to keep hiding it by making us disappear." "No one is making you disappear," the woman said, though her tone suggested that had been considered. "But we do need your cooperation in managing this situation." "Managing? You mean covering up?" "I mean preventing panic and maintaining critical defensive capabilities." They were interrupted by Margaret's phone. She answered, listened, and her face went pale. "Ma'am, we have a bigger problem. Someone just released documents online, partial scans of Clearwater materials. They're calling it the Vermont Papers." Everyone turned to Sarah. "Those aren't from me," she said quickly. "You have my phone and camera. You can check. I didn't send anything to anyone." "Then who?" the woman demanded. Marcus, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "The person who was watching, the one who took the drone footage. They were in the cottage before us, right? What if they took pictures too?" The room fell silent as The implications sank in. Someone had orchestrated this entire scenario, waited for civilians to discover the chamber, documented their removal by federal agents, and now was releasing classified materials in a way guaranteed to cause maximum public impact. "We're being played," Robert said quietly. Someone wanted Clearwater exposed, but needed plausible deniability, so they waited for innocent parties to stumble onto it, then used their detention to create a narrative. Theodore Brenner, Sarah said suddenly, what if this was his plan? He was monitoring all those infrastructure sites, documenting things. What if he was preparing to expose it all? Theodore's been dead for 3 years, the woman pointed out. But his materials were all dated, organized. What if he had a dead man's switch? What if someone was waiting for access to his property to retrieve and release his research? More phones began ringing. The woman in charge, Sarah still didn't know her name or title, made rapid decisions. "Martinez Cole, get them somewhere secure. Not here. Media knows this location. Use Safe House 7. "Ma'am," Margaret protested, "they're civilians. The boy is 10 years old. And they're now central figures in what's becoming a national security crisis. We protect them while we figure out who's orchestrating this." "Protect us or silence us?" Sarah demanded. The woman fixed her with a cold stare. "Miss Chen, in the next 24 hours, you're going to become either a hero whistleblower or a government patsy, depending on who controls the narrative. Multiple parties are going to try to use you and your son for their own ends. So yes, we're going to protect you, because right now we're the only ones who actually care about your safety more than your story." As if to underscore her point, Marcus's school camera, still sealed in its evidence bag, began flashing with incoming messages. Through the plastic, Sarah could see photo requests, interview offers, and increasingly frantic texts from numbers she didn't recognize. "The safe house," the woman ordered. "Now, before this gets worse." As they were hustled out of the conference room, Sarah caught a glimpse of a television in another office. Their faces were on every news channel. "Government whistleblowers or government victims?" one Chiron asked. Another screamed, "What is Project Clearwater?" In the parking garage, they were transferred to a different vehicle, a minivan with tinted windows that looked utterly ordinary. Margaret drove, while Robert rode shotgun. Sarah and Marcus were in the middle seats, their evidence bags of electronics left behind. "I'm scared," Marcus admitted quietly as they pulled into traffic. "Me too," Sarah admitted, pulling him close. "But we're going to be okay. We just need to be smart and careful." "Like Dad would have been?" Sarah's throat tightened. Dan would have known how to handle this, would have found the logical path through the chaos. But Dan wasn't here, and she had to protect their son alone. As Burlington fell away behind them, Sarah watched the normal world. People shopping, walking dogs, living lives unaware that their infrastructure might be more than it seemed. In 24 hours, she'd gone from a struggling single mother worried about rent to a central figure in an unfolding national crisis. The game had indeed changed. And as they drove toward an uncertain haven, Sarah realized they weren't just players or pawns. They were the board itself, the ground on which multiple forces would clash. The truth about Project Clearwater was coming out one way or another. The only question was who would control how that truth was told, and whether she and Marcus would survive the telling. Behind them, the news cycle churned on, each hour bringing new revelations, new questions, new players to the game. The Brenner cottage's secret was secret no more. But the biggest revelations and the greatest dangers still lay ahead. The safe house turned out to be a modest colonial in a quiet suburb 40 minutes from Burlington, indistinguishable from its neighbors except for the subtle security modifications. Sarah noticed reinforced door frames, strategic camera placements, windows with that particular thickness that suggested bullet resistance. Inside, it was sterile but comfortable, like a high-end hotel suite pretending to be a home. Margaret showed them around with professional efficiency. 2 bedrooms upstairs, full kitchen, secure communications in the study. No internet access, no cell service except through our encrypted channels. You're safe here. Safe from who? Sarah asked, settling Marcus on the living room couch. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the day finally wearing off. From the media. From whoever orchestrated this, or from you? From everyone, Robert answered honestly. Including us, if necessary. This situation is evolving rapidly, and not everyone in our chain of command agrees on how to handle it. As if to underscore his point, Margaret's secure phone chimed. She stepped away to answer, her expression growing increasingly troubled as she listened. When she returned, her face was grim. The document release is accelerating. Someone's posting new Clearwater files every hour, each batch more detailed than the last. Infrastructure schematics, activation protocols, chemical compound lists for the water systems. It's a controlled burn, designed to build public outrage incrementally. How bad? Robert asked. CNN just hired 3 former intelligence officials to analyze the documents on air. The Times has a team of investigative reporters digging into every Brenner family contract for the last century. And Congress, she paused, 3 senators are calling for immediate hearings. They want Sarah to testify. Absolutely not, Robert said immediately. I'll do it, Sarah said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at her. She sat straighter, drawing on reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed. If Congress wants to know what we found, I'll tell them. Hiding won't make this go away. You don't understand the forces at play here, Robert began, but Sarah cut him off. I understand that my son and I are trapped in this house while our lives are destroyed in public. I understand that someone is using us as pawns in their game, and I understand that the only way out is through. She looked at Marcus, who was watching her with those 2 wise eyes. We didn't do anything wrong. We found something we weren't supposed to find, and now everyone wants to control what happens next. But maybe it's time someone just told the truth. Margaret's phone rang again. This time her face went pale. Ma'am? She listened, then handed the phone to Sarah. It's for you. Sarah took the phone warily. Hello? Ms. Chen, this is Senator Patricia Walsh, Chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. The voice was firm, authoritative, but not unkind. I apologize for the circumstances of this call, but I believe we need to speak directly. How did you know where to reach you? Ms. Chen, half of Washington is trying to figure out what happened at the Brenner property. Your safety is paramount, but so is understanding what you discovered. I'm offering you an opportunity to tell your story in a controlled, protected environment. Sarah felt the weight of the moment. What kind of opportunity? A closed-door session with the Intelligence Committee tomorrow morning. Full legal protection, sealed testimony initially, with the option to go public if you choose. We need to understand Project Clearwater, and you're the only civilian witness we have. What about Marcus? I won't leave my son. He's welcome to accompany you. We'll ensure both your safety and comfort. Sarah looked at Margaret and Robert, both of whom were shaking their heads vigorously. But something in the senator's voice, a note of genuine concern beneath the political necessity, made her decision. We'll be there, she said. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Lawyers appeared, some representing the agency, others supposedly representing Sarah's interests. Documents were prepared, statements drafted, strategies debated. Through it all, Sarah held to one simple principle: tell the truth. Marcus, resilient as only children can be, had found a chess set in the safe house and challenged Robert to a game. Watching them play, seeing her son's mind work through complex strategies, Sarah felt a fierce pride. He was handling this extraordinary situation with more grace than most adults would manage. "Mom," he said during a quiet moment, "are we doing The right thing? Sarah sat beside him on the couch. I think so. Sometimes the right thing is just telling the truth and trusting that good people will do good things with it. Dad would be proud of you, Marcus said quietly, standing up to all these important people. Dad would be proud of you too, Sarah replied, hugging him close. Being brave when everything's scary. That night, sleep came fitfully. Sarah's dreams were filled with drowning cities, poisoned water supplies, infrastructure turned against the people it was meant to serve. She woke repeatedly, checking on Marcus, staring out the bulletproof windows, at the normal neighborhood beyond. By dawn, the news cycle had reached fever pitch. The Vermont papers were being analyzed by experts worldwide. Environmental groups were demanding immediate inspection of all infrastructure projects. Civil liberties. Organizations were filing lawsuits. The Brenner Cottage had become a pilgrimage site for protesters and conspiracy theorists alike. The ride to Washington was surreal. A convoy of black SUVs, helicopter oversight, routes changed multiple times for security. Marcus sat quietly beside her, dressed in his best clothes, the ones she'd bought for school pictures, now serving a purpose she could never have imagined. The Capitol building loomed before them, monument to democracy, and, Sarah now understood, keeper of dark secrets. They were whisked through underground entrances, security checkpoints, marble halls that echoed with history and power. The Senate Intelligence Committee's secure hearing room was smaller than Sarah had expected, more intimate. 13 senators arranged in a horseshoe, their faces grave, camera equipment for sealed testimony recording, and in the witness chair, a microphone that would carry her words into history. Senator Walsh opened the proceedings with unexpected gentleness. Ms. Chen, Master Chen, thank you for being here. I want to assure you that you're not under investigation. You're witnesses to something significant, and we need to understand what you found. Sarah began at the beginning. The foreclosure notice, the failing car, the desperate need for Hartley's bonus. She painted a picture of ordinary American struggle that resonated visibly with several senators. Then the cottage, the inventory, the anomaly in the basement. I want to be clear, she said, looking directly at the committee. We weren't looking for secrets. We were looking for a few $100s to keep our electricity on. What we found instead was evidence that for decades, American infrastructure has been designed with hidden military capabilities that the public never knew about. She described the documents, the chemical dispersal systems in water treatment plants, the flood controls in dams that could weaponize entire river systems, the power grid modifications that could create targeted blackouts or overloads. The thing that struck me, Sarah continued, wasn't that these capabilities exist. Maybe during the Cold War they made sense. What struck me was the deliberate deception. Generations of Americans have lived their lives unaware that their most basic infrastructure could be turned against them, or used to protect them, one senator interjected. These systems were designed for extreme scenarios, foreign invasion, nuclear war. With respect, Senator, Sarah replied, surprising herself with her firmness, protection without consent isn't protection, it's control. And capabilities designed for defense can be misused for oppression. The hearing continued. For hours, Sarah answered every question honestly, Marcus occasionally adding details she'd forgotten. The senator's reactions ranged from shock to defensive anger to genuine concern. Finally, Senator Walsh asked the crucial question. Ms. Chen, what do you think should happen now? Sarah had thought about this all night. Full disclosure. Immediate. Inspection of all Clearwater sites by independent monitors. Public hearings on how this happened and how to ensure it never happens again. And most importantly, a national conversation about what we're willing to accept in the name of security. That could cause panic, another senator warned. Senator, Sarah said quietly. My 10-year-old son helped discover a secret government. Un programme to weaponize civilian infrastructure. The panic is already here. The question is whether we address it with truth or let it fester with rumors and conspiracy theories. The closed session ended with promises of further investigation, but as they were preparing to leave, Senator Walsh pulled Sarah aside. There's something else, she said quietly. The document releases, they're not random. Each batch is timed to maximize impact, guided by someone with intimate knowledge of Clearwater. We think Theodore Brenner didn't just monitor the program. We think he was preparing to expose it. But he died 3 years ago, Sarah pointed out. Yes, but his work didn't. Someone has been waiting for the right moment, the right catalyst. The senator studied Sarah intently. You and your son were that catalyst. The question is, are you prepared for what comes next? What came next was a media storm unlike anything Sarah could have imagined. Within hours of their testimony, leaks began, not of their words, but of their presence at the Capitol. Photos of Sarah and Marcus entering the building, speculation about their testimony, demands for transparency. That evening, in a new safe house, they'd been moved twice for security. Sarah made a decision that would define their future. She called the senator back. I want to go public, she said. Full testimony on the record. The American people deserve to know what their government built into their communities without their knowledge. Are you certain? Once you take this step, there's no going back. You'll become the face of this revelation. Sarah looked at Marcus, who nodded with that serious expression that made him look so much like his father. We're certain. The public hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. In the interim, Sarah worked with lawyers and advisors to prepare her statement. She reviewed additional Clearwater documents that had been declassified for the hearing. The scope was staggering. Thousands of infrastructure projects across the country, each with hidden capabilities that ranged from defensive to potentially catastrophic. The night before the hearing, Marcus asked, "What if people get angry at us for telling?" "Some will," Sarah admitted. "Some people will say we've damaged national security, that we've made America weaker, but others will say we've made it stronger by insisting on transparency and accountability." "What do you think?" Sarah considered carefully. "I think democracy only works when citizens know what their government is doing. And I think your dad would want us to tell the truth, even when it's hard." The public hearing was held in the largest committee room in the Capitol, packed with media, citizens, and officials. Sarah sat at the witness table, Marcus beside her. Despite protocol suggesting he remain in the audience, she'd insisted they'd discovered this together, they'd face it together. Sarah began with a prepared statement that had been carefully crafted but which she delivered with raw honesty. She told their story, the struggling single mother, the inventory job, the accidental discovery. But more than that, she told America's story, how fear had driven the creation of hidden weapons within the very infrastructure of daily life. "I understand the impulse," she said, looking directly at the cameras. "In the face of existential threats, extraordinary measures seem justified. But somewhere along the way, temporary emergency provisions became permanent hidden capabilities. Defensive preparations became potential offensive weapons, and the American people, the people these systems were supposedly protecting, were never told." She held up a document, one of many that would be entered into the public record. "This details how the Riverside Dam in Ohio can be used to flood 3 counties. This one shows how water treatment facilities in 12 major cities can introduce various chemicals into the supply. This one outlines how power grids can be manipulated to disable entire regions." The committee room was dead silent. Sarah continued, "I'm not here to judge whether these capabilities should exist. That's a decision for all of us, through our democratic processes. I'm here to say that we deserve to know. We deserve to decide. And we deserve to ensure that tools built for our protection can never be turned toward our oppression. The questioning lasted 6 hours. Some senators tried to paint her as naive, others as unpatriotic. But Sarah held firm, always returning to core principles: transparency, accountability, democracy. Marcus spoke only once when a senator asked if he understood the gravity of what they'd revealed. "I understand that adults built scary things and didn't tell anyone," he said simply, "and I understand that's wrong. My mom teaches me that lying is wrong, even when you're scared, especially when you're scared." The hearing ended with no clear resolution, but the impact was immediate. Within hours, protests began at Clearwater sites across the country. State governments demanded federal inspections, environmental groups filed lawsuits, civil liberties organizations called for comprehensive oversight. But there was backlash too. Death threats arrived at their safe house. Online harassment campaigns targeted both Sarah and, horrifyingly, Marcus. Former military and intelligence officials accused them of treason, of weakening America's defenses, of naive idealism that endangered national security. Through it all, Sarah held to her conviction that sunlight was the best disinfectant. She gave interviews, wrote op-eds, testified before additional committees, always with the same message: democracy requires informed consent. The personal cost was enormous. Their old life was gone, the apartment, the jobs, the simple anonymity of being nobody special. They moved frequently for security reasons. Marcus had to be homeschooled, then eventually enrolled in a private school under an assumed name. But there were victories too. The Clearwater Transparency Act, passed 6 months after their testimony, required full disclosure of all dual-use infrastructure and civilian oversight of any modifications. The Brenner Cottage was designated a historical site, its underground chamber preserved as a museum to government secrecy and civilian courage. Theodore Brenner was posthumously recognized for his efforts to document and ultimately expose the program. 1 year after that fateful day in the cottage, Sarah and Marcus stood before Congress again, this time to accept the Congressional Medal of Honor for Civil Courage, a new award created specifically to recognize citizens who risked everything to uphold democratic principles. "We didn't seek to be heroes," Sarah said in her acceptance speech, Marcus standing tall beside her. "We were just a mother and son trying to survive, who stumbled upon a truth too big to ignore. What we learned is that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they choose truth over comfort, transparency over secrecy, and courage over fear." She looked out at the audience. Senators who had grilled her, journalists who had hounded her, citizens who had both praised and vilified her. Project Clearwater was born from fear, fear of invasion, fear of destruction, fear of being caught unprepared. But fear makes us do things in darkness that we would never accept in daylight. Democracy dies in darkness. It thrives in transparency. Marcus stepped to the microphone, no longer the scared 10-year-old from the safe house, but a young man shaped by extraordinary circumstances. "My dad died when I was 5, he said, but my mom taught me what he would have wanted me to know, that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always right. We found a secret that wasn't meant to be found. We could have stayed quiet, stayed safe. But that's not who we are. That's not who America should be." The applause was thunderous, but Sarah barely heard it. She was thinking of that morning a year ago, the foreclosure notice, the broken car, the desperate need for $500. How a simple inventory job had transformed into a national reckoning with secrecy and power. They'd lost their old life, but gained something more valuable: the knowledge that ordinary citizens could still make a difference, that truth could still prevail over power, that democracy, however flawed, could still self-correct when courageous people demanded it. As they left the capital, Sarah's phone, a new one encrypted and secure, buzzed with a message. It was from Margaret Martinez, the agent who'd first detained them. "Watched your speech. You did the right thing, both of you. Stay safe." Sarah smiled, tucking the phone away. They would stay safe. They would stay vigilant, and they would stay committed to the principle that had carried them through the darkness, that in a democracy the people have a right to know what is done in their name. The Brenner cottage still stood in the Vermont mountains, no longer hiding secrets, but hosting tours of citizens learning about their history, the real history, complicated and sometimes dark, but finally fully in the light. And somewhere in a modest home under an assumed name, a mother and son who had changed America went about their daily lives, forever bonded by the day they chose truth over silence, courage over comfort, and discovered that sometimes the most powerful thing ordinary people can do is simply refuse to look away. The game had been played. The truth had won. And while the cost had been high, the prize, a more transparent, accountable democracy, was worth every sacrifice they'd made. Their story would be told in history books, analyzed in ethics classes, debated in Congress for years to come. But for Sarah and Marcus Chen, it would always be simpler than that. The day they found something they weren't supposed to find, and chose to share it with the world. The foreclosure notice that had started it all was now framed in the Clearwater Museum, a reminder that history often turns on the smallest moments, the most ordinary people, the simple choice to do what's right, even when everything argues for doing what's easy. Democracy had been tested. It had bent but not broken. And two unlikely heroes had proven that in America, even now, truth spoken with courage could still change the world. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.